When I saw the 2 lines on the test, I knew my life would change forever. At 18, I was supposed to be thinking about graduation parties, choosing a career, maybe moving out for college. I was supposed to be dreaming about the freedom everyone said came with adulthood. Instead, I was standing barefoot on a cracked bathroom floor, holding a plastic stick that felt heavier than the entire world. My heart beat so loud I could barely hear my own breathing. 2 lines. Clear. Unmistakable. No way to pretend it wasn't real. I stared at that test for what felt like hours, though it couldn't have been more than a few minutes. My hands were trembling, and my knees threatened to give out. The reality hit me like a wave of icy water. I was pregnant. I was alone, and I was only 18. 1,000 questions fired through my mind like bullets. How could I possibly raise a child? How would my family react? What would happen to my future? The walls of that bathroom seemed to close in, shrinking until there was barely space for me to breathe. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. I wanted to turn back time just a few months, to when life felt messy but manageable, when my biggest worry was whether I'd pass my math exam. But life doesn't offer rewinds. Life only moves forward, merciless and fast. And now it was moving forward inside me, whether I was ready or not. The test slipped from my hand and clattered against the sink. I covered my face and let the tears come, hot and endless. I wasn't crying because I didn't want the baby. I was crying because I had no idea how to be a mother when I still felt like a child myself. My friends were out celebrating their first taste of independence, and I was staring at a future I hadn't planned for, one I didn't even feel strong enough to face. At first, denial was easier than acceptance. I tucked the test deep in the trash, under tissues and paper, as if hiding it could erase the truth. I told myself maybe it was wrong, maybe it was just stress, maybe my body was playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew. My body knew. My heart knew. That tiny life had already begun, and it demanded I face a reality I wasn't ready for. I thought about telling him, the boy who had promised forever in whispers, but couldn't keep a promise for a week. We weren't in love. We weren't even serious. To him, I had been a distraction, a way to pass time before college. To me, he had been comfort in a world that often felt too heavy. But now, he was the father of the child inside me. When I imagined his reaction, I saw the same thing every time. His back turned, his hands in his pockets, his voice cold. Not my problem. And in a way, I was right. When I finally told him, that's exactly what he said. That was the night I realized I was truly alone. At 18, I had no partner to lean on, no steady job, no clear path ahead. I had only my fear and a heartbeat inside me that would soon demand everything I had to give. The days after the test blurred together, a haze of dread and disbelief. I walked the halls of school feeling like a stranger in my own skin, wondering if anyone could already tell. I sat in class pretending to care about essays and equations, while inside me a secret grew larger and louder. I looked at my friends gossiping about prom dresses, and I felt an invisible wall between us. Their lives were still theirs. Mine had been claimed by 2 faint pink lines. Every mirror became a battleground. Was I showing already? Could anyone see? I wore oversized hoodies and carried my shame like an extra layer of clothing. I avoided eye contact with teachers, terrified that someone might see the truth before I was ready to admit it. Nights were worse. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, hearing the tick of the clock, knowing each second carried me closer to a future I couldn't escape. Fear became my constant shadow, fear of being judged, fear of disappointing my family, fear of being incapable, but most of all, fear of failing the little life growing inside me. That fear was heavier than anything I had ever carried, heavier than homework, heavier than heartbreak, heavier than the silence that followed after he left me. And yet, beneath the fear, something unexpected stirred, a fragile spark, almost impossible to recognize. It wasn't joy, not yet. It wasn't confidence either. It was something quieter, like a whisper reminding me that endings are sometimes disguised as beginnings. I didn't know it then, but that whisper would save me more times than I could count. At 18, I was a single mother-to-be. The world expected me to fail, to break, to disappear under the weight of my mistakes. But that test, the one I dropped on the bathroom floor, wasn't just a verdict. It was a challenge. It asked me who I really was and what I was willing to fight for. And this is the story of how I answered. Hook pronto, con 700+ palabras y impacto inmediato. Quer que eu avance direto para a introdução, 1200 plus palavras, aprofundando quem era essa jovem mãe, como ficou sozinha e como sua vida virou de cabeça para baixo. Você disse, sim. O ChatGPT disse, pensou por 12 is. Perfeito. Fernando. Segue a introdução em inglês, com mais de 1200 palavras, em primeira pessoa, dando o contexto completo de quem é a mãe, sua vida antes da gravidez e como ficou sozinha. Introduction, 1200 plus words. Before the test, I was the version of me that most people remember, 18, stubborn, and halfway between a girl and the woman I thought I'd become. I lived with my mother in a small rental, close to the high school and the grocery store where I stocked shelves 3 nights a week. Our place was the kind of apartment you learn to love because it holds you even when it squeaks and leaks. Thin carpet, a door that stuck in summer, a kitchen window that framed a slice of sky at sunset. On good days, I told myself it was temporary. On bad days, I reminded myself it was safe. Either way, it was home. I wasn't the kind of girl people wrote songs about. I wasn't the valedictorian, or the one with a scholarship already framed and waiting. I passed my classes, laughed too loudly with friends, and counted tips in my apron pocket as if small money could feel big if I believed hard enough. I liked English class because words felt like a place I could go without a bus ticket. I liked the grocery store because it gave me a schedule and a reason to say no to invitations that always seemed to end with someone drunk and crying. My dreams were modest but mine. A community college a few towns over, maybe nursing or early childhood education, a car that didn't rattle, a tiny apartment with curtains I picked out myself, a version of independence that smelled like laundry soap and fresh coffee. My mother worked long hours at a dental clinic, the kind of job that leaves your feet sore and your patience thin. She taught me the religion of showing up, on time, prepared, with a pen that works. She also taught me that love can be fierce without being loud. We weren't the hug and talk about feelings pair, but we were steady. The last time my father sent a birthday card, I was 9. It smelled like a closet and had a cartoon dog on the front. I remember the dog more than the message. Mostly, I remember my mother's face when I pretended not to care. There are certain silences in a house that never quite leave, so when I say I wasn't looking for rescue, I mean it. I was not waiting for a boy to make my life begin. I was waiting tables in the school cafeteria for lunch credit, trading shifts at the store, lining up financial aid deadlines in a notebook with frayed corners. I could pack a lunch for $3 and make it look intentional. I could stretch shampoo for an extra week by adding water and shaking the bottle. I was not helpless, even when I felt fragile. I had built a small raft out of routines, and I floated on it as carefully as I could. He didn't enter my life like a storm. He arrived like weather you don't notice at first, a little warmer, a little brighter. He was a grade ahead of me and back in town after dropping out of a fancy-sounding program that turned out not to be for him. He had a laugh that made you feel clever for saying ordinary things. He asked questions and listened like your answers mattered. The first time we talked, we were outside a Friday night football game neither of us intended to watch, sharing a paper cup of hot chocolate too sweet to finish. It felt easy. Ease is a dangerous feeling when you've lived mostly on grit. We didn't call it dating. We called it hanging out, which meant long drives on roads without streetlights. Music turned up just enough to make the silence soft. Frappuccinos we couldn't afford, and confessions that sounded bigger in the dark. He said he wasn't sure who he wanted to be yet. I said I wanted to be the kind of person who could leave town without leaving myself behind. He said I was different. I didn't ask if that was good or bad. I won't pretend I mistook it for love. I mistook it for safety. There is a difference, but at 18 the difference feels theoretical. He texted good morning and good night. He remembered my work schedule and waited outside the store when the late shift ended, hands in his pockets, breath white in winter air. He told me I deserved more than what the town expected of girls like me, and for a while, I believed him because believing felt better than anything else I had. It wasn't long, weeks into months, before I stopped keeping such careful track of what was mine and what was ours. A toothbrush, a hoodie, a Friday night. That is how a life expands when you're young, not with decisions etched in stone, but with a quiet rearranging of drawers. I didn't plan to sleep with him. I didn't plan not to. Planning wasn't the point. We were both too sure nothing irreversible could happen to us because irreversible things happen to other people in cautionary assemblies and after-school specials, not in the warm, private fog of your own car with the music low and the windows fogged. When my period was late, I told myself stress can do that. Senior year stress, work stress, future stress. When it was late again, I did the math 3 times and still came up with the same answers. I bought the test with a gift card I'd been saving for a new pair of jeans, because irony likes company. I took it before school, because bravado sometimes looks like terrible timing. 2 lines, immediate and undeniable. I put the test in the trash, took it back out, put it in again, as if repetition could turn the clock back. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. The bathroom mirror held a girl who looked like me but more afraid. I told her to breathe. She didn't. Telling him was a script I wrote and rewrote in my head. Where we would be, how I would start, how we would get from panic to plan. The script died the moment I said the word pregnant. His face hardened into something I recognized only because I'd seen adults wear it when they were about to say no. He didn't shout. He didn't argue. He just said, "I can't do this," like he was setting down a bag that was too heavy and walking away lighter. Later, I would learn that absence can be loud. That night, it sounded like a car door closing. If you had asked me that week to define alone, I would have said it tasted like the air inside a closed closet. Stale, thin, a place where breath struggles. I went to school because school was what I did. I stood in the hall between classes watching other girls braid each other's hair and laugh at videos and plan weekends. I felt like a ghost my own life had forgotten. I kept my secret under a sweatshirt and a calm face that fooled no one who looked carefully. I didn't think anyone did. The first adult to notice was my English teacher, Mrs. Carter, who had a way of reading students the way she read poems. Slowly, to find the line that mattered. She asked me to stay after class to talk about my college essay, the one I hadn't started. When the room emptied, she leaned on the desk and said, "You look like you're carrying something heavy." I almost lied. I almost said, "Just senior year." Instead, I nodded and opened my mouth, and a truth I had kept inside rushed out so fast I couldn't organize it. She listened without interrupting, handed me a box of tissues without making a big deal out of it, and when I ran out of words, she said, "You are not the first, and you are not the last. It will be hard, and you can do hard things." She wrote down the name of a clinic where the nurses were kind and circled it twice. It was the first circle of safety I'd seen since those 2 lines. Telling my mother was worse because it mattered more. I rehearsed in the mirror, then lost the script at our kitchen table while she peeled carrots for soup. I said, "Mom," like an apology. "I need to tell you something," like a warning, and I'm pregnant, like a confession. She set down the peeler, eyes still on the cutting board for 3 long breaths. When she finally looked at me, her face was not the storm I'd feared. It was a weather I recognized, disappointment braided with love, worry braided with resolve. She asked if I was safe. I nodded. She asked about the father. I told her the truth. She closed her eyes for a moment and then opened them and said, "Okay, then it's us." Not enthusiastic, not devastated. A baseline, a place to stand. We didn't shout. We made tea and sat at the small kitchen table under the cheap light that always hummed. She told me about a cousin who had been young and pregnant and stubborn and had made a life that looked nothing like the one she thought she'd have, and how sometimes that is the point. She didn't promise it would be easy. She didn't try to solve it in a night. She told me we would call the clinic, She told me I would keep working if I could, and go to school if I could and rest when I had to, and we would figure out the rest in the unglamorous way people figure out the rest. 1 phone call, 1 bus ride, 1 conversation at a time. The clinic smelled like sanitizer and gentle lies. The waiting room held girls my age and women older, some alone, some with men who stared at their phones, some with mothers holding purses tight on their laps. A TV in the corner played a nature documentary with the sound off, penguins sliding across ice, absurd and determined. A nurse called my name in a tone that carried both routine and mercy. She took my vitals, asked questions in a cadence that made them easier to answer, handed me pamphlets I pretended I would read later. The ultrasound appointment would be soon, she said. I would hear a heartbeat. I nodded like I was not terrified. In the weeks that followed, I became 2 people. There was the me who went to school, stacked canned beans into pyramids at the store, filled out financial aid forms with boxes that asked for numbers I didn't have. Then there was the me who lay awake at night counting calendar squares, Googling symptoms, pressing a hand to my stomach as if responsibility could be transferred through skin. I learned which pants hid my body the longest. I learned the bus schedule to the clinic, and which driver let you on even if your card glitched. I learned that soup with rice stretches farther than soup with noodles. I learned that people who used to know everything about me could walk past without seeing me at all. I also learned that help is not always a speech. Sometimes it is a neighbor who watches you come up the stairs with groceries and silently takes the heavier bag. Sometimes it is a guidance counselor who prints a list of scholarships for non-traditional students and slides it across the desk without comment. Sometimes it is Mrs. Carter finding me in the hallway and asking if I want to eat lunch in her classroom so I don't have to sit in a loud place pretending. Sometimes it is my mother leaving an extra 20 on the counter for milk and not asking for change. When I told him, really told him, with a due date and a plan and a question about what he intended to do, he put his palms up as if fending off a wave. He said the words boys say when they fear they have become men too soon. Not ready, not sure, not my path, not my problem. He said he was sorry, which I think he believed. He said he hoped I would understand, which I did not. I walked home on legs that felt like borrowed furniture. I tripped on a crack in the sidewalk and caught myself on a fence and laughed, a wild sound that wasn't funny. I learned that day you can know something is coming and still be surprised by how sharp it is. Alone was no longer theoretical. Alone meant 2 jobs if I could get them. A stack of appointment cards clipped to my planner. A bathroom scale I didn't step on because numbers can be cruel, and I had enough cruelty already. Alone meant staring at college flyers and feeling the paper say not now instead of never, and deciding not now could be a kind of hope if I repeated it kindly enough. I chose to keep the baby not because I was brave, but because the idea of not keeping the baby felt like ending a story I had already started reading out loud. My mother didn't pressure me. She said she would stand by me whichever door I walked through, and I believed her. The decision settled in me slowly, like silt in water after someone stops stirring. It didn't make the future clear. It made it mine. As the first trimester thickened into the second, I felt the smallest flutter one night, a sensation like a goldfish turning in a bowl. I froze, hand pressed under my sweatshirt, breath held. It came again, not dramatic, just insistent. Not a kick, not yet, but a presence. I cried for 10 minutes straight, quietly so I wouldn't wake my mother. Not because the fear had vanished, because for the first time the fear had company. People talk about village and support, and how it takes both. My village, at the start, looked like a handful of names. My mother, Mrs. Carter, a nurse at the clinic who always remembered my appointment times, a co-worker named Ellie who slipped a tiny pair of socks into my locker with a note that said, "For your tiny human, you've got this." It did not look like a fairy tale. It looked like real life, uneven, imperfect, possible. I was 18, and I was already someone's mother long before the world could see it. The introduction to that truth wasn't a party or a shower or a gender reveal or any of the staged moments people post online. It was quieter and more stubborn. It was a girl learning where the cheap produce was in the grocery store she worked at. It was a daughter and her mother at a kitchen table with a humming light, circling dates on a calendar. It was a student sitting in the back of a classroom writing a college essay that began with the sentence, "I am not who I plan to be, and maybe that is the point." By the time my stomach announced me before my voice did, I had made peace with the fact that people would look. Some would judge, some would pity. A few would meet my eyes and say hello like I was still me. I clung to those hellos. They were proof that I hadn't disappeared. This is the part of the story where some version of rescue usually appears. A reconciliation, a scholarship, a miracle check in the mail. None of that happened. Not then. What happened was smaller, and in its way, more miraculous. I kept going. I kept showing up to the store and to school and to the clinic and to my own life. I kept the notebook updated. I kept the faith that not now could turn into soon and maybe could harden into yes. I kept my promise to the tiny life turning inside me, that even if I had to do it afraid, I would do it. That is how I became alone without becoming lost. That is how the girl I had been loosened her grip, and the mother I was becoming found a place to stand. I was not ready. I was not prepared. I was not the exception to any rule. I was simply a person in a small apartment with a humming light and a growing list of things to do, learning in real time what it means to love something more than the plans you made for yourself. And that is the truth of how I got here, not with a single dramatic choice, but with 1,000 small ones, each a stitch, each a step, each a breath. I was 18, pregnant, and alone. I was also, for the first time, undeniable to myself. Pronto! Se quiser, já sigo com o conflict, 1200 plus palavras, na mesma voz e ritmo. Você disse. Sim, o ChatGPT disse. Perfeito. Agora seguimos para a parte do conflito, em inglês, com 1.200 plus palavras, em primeira pessoa. Aqui vamos mergulhar nos desafios reais da jovem mãe. Dificuldades financeiras, preconceito, solidão e medo. Conflict. 200 plus words. The first thing I learned about pregnancy at 18 was that it makes money vanish faster than you thought possible. My part-time job at the grocery store barely covered gas money and a contribution to rent. Once the appointment started, once vitamins became non-negotiable, once every ad I saw seemed to whisper diapers, bottles, formula, it felt like I was standing at the edge of a canyon tossing coins into the dark. I clipped coupons like they were life preservers. I compared brands, sizes, ounces, every line of every label, until shopping became a math test I was destined to fail. The paycheck always came too late. Bills always came too soon. My mother worked harder than anyone I knew, but even she admitted some nights that there wasn't enough. I hated hearing that, not because she was wrong, but because it made me realize how fragile everything already was before my news. Now the weight doubled. She tried to protect me, insisted I keep at least some of my money for baby things. But when the landlord's letter arrived, when the electric company called, I couldn't sit still while she carried all of it. I started taking extra shifts at the store, ignoring how the long hours made my back ache and my ankles swell. Exhaustion felt safer than guilt. The second lesson came from strangers. People love to have opinions about girls with bellies and no rings. Some spoke them out loud, blunt as stones. Too young. What a waste. Where's the father? Others said nothing, but let their eyes linger long enough to leave bruises. I learned to read silence like a second language. When customers avoided my checkout line, when classmates whispered in corners, when relatives at church sighed instead of smiling, those were their sentences, unspoken but sharp. It wasn't only strangers. Friends I'd known since middle school slowly drifted. At first, they texted check-ins, promises to visit, to hang out like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Their weekends revolved around parties and late-night drives. Mine revolved around morning sickness and clinic appointments. Invitations stopped coming. Phones stopped buzzing. The girls who once braided my hair in the cafeteria now walked past me in the hallway, as if pregnancy had erased my name. Loneliness wasn't sudden. It was gradual, like watching paint fade from a wall until you realize it's no longer colorful. Nights were the heaviest. I would lie on my side, one hand on my growing stomach, staring at the ceiling while the house hummed. Fear collected in those hours like rainwater in buckets. What if I wasn't enough? What if the baby came early? What if I couldn't finish school, couldn't get a job, couldn't afford rent? The what-ifs were louder than thunder. Sometimes I whispered them into the dark, just to empty them from my chest, but they always came back. I wanted to believe in the strength people said I had, but at night, strength felt like a costume I couldn't put on anymore. One evening, after a long shift, I stood in line at the pharmacy with prenatal vitamins in my hand. The cashier, maybe in her 30s, looked at me with something between pity and disdain. "Honey," she said softly but not kindly, "you should have thought this through." My face burned as the people in line glanced at me. I wanted to vanish, to dissolve right there between aisles of shampoo and chewing gum. I smiled tightly, paid with crumpled bills, and left without looking back. In the parking lot, I sat in the car and sobbed until the windows fogged. That wasn't the first comment like that, and it wouldn't be the last. But for some reason, that one stuck like a thorn. School was its own battlefield. Teachers who once encouraged me now looked at me with narrowed eyes, as if wondering if I'd make it to graduation. Some spoke carefully, too carefully, their words dripping with unspoken doubts. Others avoided me altogether, grading papers without looking me in the eye. A counselor suggested I consider alternative programs, with a tone that felt more like, give up. Only Mrs. Carter, my English teacher, treated me the same as before, expectant, firm, and kind. She circled essays with red ink, asked questions about my plans, and reminded me that pregnancy didn't erase my brain. Without her, I might have believed it did. At work, exhaustion grew teeth. Long shifts on my feet left me limping home, shoes damp from spilled milk, wrists sore from lifting boxes. Some coworkers were kind. Ellie always offered to switch heavy tasks, but others muttered about special treatment. My manager reduced my hours for safety, which sounded thoughtful but felt like punishment. Fewer hours meant less money, and less money meant fewer choices. Every decision became a calculation. Skip lunch to save $5, walk instead of bus to save $2, pretend I wasn't dizzy so I wouldn't lose another shift. The baby's father never returned. Sometimes I caught myself staring at my phone, willing a message to appear, some apology or explanation. None came. His absence wasn't just physical, it was an echo in every doctor's visit, every kick I felt, every moment someone asked, "Who's helping you?" I hated that my child's story began with abandonment. I hated that I couldn't change it. I told myself I didn't need him, that I could do this alone. Most days I believed it. Some days I didn't. Fear wasn't only about survival. It was about identity. Who was I now? I wasn't just a teenager, not just a student, not just a daughter. I was a mother. The word felt too big, like a coat that didn't fit. Every time I pressed my hand against my stomach, I wondered if I could grow into it. Would I know what to do when the baby cried? Would I be patient, kind, wise? Or would I fail in ways too deep to repair? These questions stalked me in classrooms, in break rooms, on sidewalks. I wore them heavier than my backpack. Health scares amplified everything. Once, after a long shift, I felt a sharp pain low in my abdomen. Panic surged. I imagined every headline, every cautionary tale. My mother rushed me to the clinic, where I waited in a plastic chair under fluorescent lights, heart pounding. The nurse assured me it was strain from overwork, told me to rest. Rest felt like a luxury, not an option. That night, I cried not from the pain, but from the reminder that my choices weren't just mine anymore. Everything I did or didn't do echoed into someone else's future. Still, there were glimmers of light. A neighbor slipped an envelope under our door with $20 and the words, "For the baby." Ellie gave me a bag of baby clothes her sister no longer needed. Mrs. Carter pulled me aside after class to tell me she believed in me, and that belief clung to me like armor. These small acts didn't erase the prejudice, the fear, the loneliness, but they softened the edges. They reminded me I wasn't entirely invisible. The hardest part of the conflict wasn't the individual struggles. It was their accumulation. Poverty gnawed at my energy. Prejudice chipped at my dignity. Loneliness hollowed my nights, and fear haunted my days. Together, they threatened to crush me. Some mornings, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering if getting up was worth it, but then I'd feel a flutter inside me, a reminder that I wasn't the only one depending on me. That small movement became my alarm clock, my reason to stand, to try again. At 18, I was supposed to be dreaming of beginnings. Instead, I was learning to survive endings, the end of girlhood, the end of certain friendships, the end of the carefree future I thought I'd have. But in that ending, something else was forming. I didn't see it clearly then, but beneath the weight of every fear and judgment, strength was gathering like roots underground, quiet, but unshakable. That was the conflict of my story. Not one battle, but many. Not one villain, but an army of doubt, scarcity, and shame. And yet, through every bill, every whisper, every lonely night, I kept moving. Not gracefully, not without tears, but forward. Always forward. Conflito pronto, com 1.200 plus palavras abordando finanças, preconceito, solidão e medo. Quer que eu avance direto para o clímax, 1.200 plus palavras, onde vem o momento mais duro e decisivo dessa jornada. Você disse, sim. O ChatGPT disse, ótimo. Agora entramos no clímax em inglês, com 1.200 plus palavras. Essa parte é o coração da narrativa, o momento mais duro e decisivo da jornada, quando a jovem mãe quase desiste, enfrenta o maior medo ou atravessa uma situação de vida ou morte que transforma tudo. Climax. 1.200 plus words. The climax of my journey did not come quietly. It came like a storm in the night, violent and merciless, the kind of storm that makes you believe the walls around you might collapse. I was 7 months pregnant when it hit. Until then, I had been pushing forward, day after day, juggling exhaustion, whispers, and the suffocating weight of responsibility. But that night, everything nearly shattered. It started with pain, sharp, sudden, and merciless. I was stacking boxes at work, trying to finish the closing shift. My back had been aching all day, but this was different. The pain tore through me like lightning. My knees buckled and I clutched the shelf to steady myself. The box fell to the floor with a crash, spilling cans that rolled in every direction. My manager rushed over, frowning. but all I could do was gasp for air. My stomach tightened into a hard, unnatural knot. Someone called an ambulance. I remember the blare of sirens, the blur of fluorescent lights, the cold press of the stretcher under me. My mind was a frenzy of terror. It's too early. I can't lose this baby. Please, not now. Tears streamed down my face as I clutched my stomach, whispering promises into the chaos. Hold on. Please, hold on. At the hospital, everything moved quickly. Nurses pressing monitors against my belly, voices barking numbers I didn't understand, hands inserting IV lines. The room smelled like antiseptic and fear. I lay there, small and trembling, while machines beeped with an authority I couldn't question. Then came the silence, the kind of silence that slices deeper than any sound. The doctor pressed the Doppler to my stomach, frowning as he searched. Seconds stretched into eternities. My world froze. Finally, the heartbeat came, faint but steady. Relief flooded me so violently I sobbed out loud, unable to stop. But the danger wasn't gone. The doctor explained that I was experiencing preterm contractions, and if they couldn't be stopped, my baby might be born too soon. I nodded mechanically, barely processing. My only thought was survival, for both of us. They gave me medication, told me to rest, to stay still. My mother arrived breathless, eyes wide with fear, clutching my hand as if it could anchor me. She stroked my hair back from my damp forehead, whispering, "You're okay. You're okay. The baby's okay." Her words became the only rope I had to cling to. That night in the hospital, I hit the breaking point. Lying in that bed, hooked to monitors, my body betraying me, I felt the crushing weight of every fear I had ever carried. The loneliness, the poverty, the judgment, all of it pressed down until I could barely breathe. For the first time, I truly considered giving up. I thought about adoption, about handing my child to someone better, someone stronger, someone not broken at 18. I thought about disappearing into a version of life where this had never happened. The temptation was so strong it felt like gravity. I closed my eyes, tears slipping silently, and whispered, "I can't do this. I'm not enough. I'm just a kid. Please, someone else take this from me." But then, it happened. In the middle of my despair, my baby kicked, a small, insistent flutter against my ribs. Then again, stronger. It was as if that tiny life inside me was answering back, saying, "I'm here. I need you. Don't quit now." That moment cracked something open in me. The pain was still there, the fear still crushing, but the kick reminded me that I wasn't fighting for myself alone. My child wasn't asking for perfection. My child was asking for presence, for breath, for me to stay. I broke into sobs, clutching my belly, whispering over and over, "I'm here. I'm here. I won't leave you. We'll do this together." The nurse walked in and found me crying, but she didn't interrupt. She just adjusted the monitor and gave me a soft smile, as if she understood what had just shifted inside me. The next morning, the contractions had slowed. The crisis had passed for now, but I wasn't the same. I had walked to the edge of surrender and looked over the cliff, and the only thing that pulled me back was the reminder that someone needed me, someone who had no voice, no choice, no chance without me. That realization burned into my bones. From then on, I treated every day as borrowed time. I stopped chasing perfection. I stopped punishing myself for not being everything. Instead, I promised myself I would be something. Steady. My baby didn't need me to be rich or admired or flawless. My baby needed me to keep showing up, heartbeat after heartbeat. Still, the climax of my journey didn't end in the hospital. The true breaking point came weeks later, when I went into labor earlier than expected. The contractions were fierce, my body shaking with effort, hours blurred together, sweat and screams and fear mixing into something primal. At one point, the monitor slowed, and the room changed. Doctors rushed, nurses moved fast, voices grew urgent. I heard words like distress and oxygen. Panic exploded inside me. For a moment, I thought I would lose everything. My baby, my fight, my reason. My mother squeezed my hand so tightly it hurt, shouting, "Push, baby, push! You can do this!" I gathered every fragment of strength, every ounce of fear, every prayer I had ever whispered into the dark. I pushed as if the whole world depended on it. And then, the cry. Loud, piercing, undeniable. My baby's first sound split the air and stitched me back together in the same breath. I sobbed, shaking, as they placed the tiny wrinkled bundle on my chest. Tears blurred my vision, but I didn't need sight to understand. Against my skin, I felt the warmth of life, fragile but fierce. The storm had not taken us. We had survived. In that instant, I knew the climax of my journey was not about the pain, the judgment, or the fear. It was about this, the moment I chose to stay, to fight, to love, even when surrender seemed easier. It was about proving to myself that weakness and strength can live in the same body, that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to keep going anyway. At 18, I had walked into motherhood broken, terrified, and unprepared. But that cry, that first sound of my baby's life, was the proof that survival had meaning. That love, even when born from struggle, could be enough to transform despair into hope. Clímax pronto, com 1.200 plus palavras, mostrando o momento de maior dor, quando ela quase desistiu, e a virada emocional com a chegada do bebê. Quer que eu siga agora para o desfecho, 700 plus palavras, fechando a história com esperança, superação e a lição inspiradora? Você disse, sim. O chat GPT disse, perfeito. Agora chegamos ao desfecho, em inglês, com 700 plus palavras. Aqui a história precisa encerrar com emoção, superação e uma mensagem inspiradora, sempre terminando em esperança. Conclusion, 700 plus words. The first nights at home were nothing like the picture-perfect stories I had once imagined. My baby cried often, and I stumbled through sleepless hours, learning how to hold, feed, and soothe with hands that still shook from inexperience. There were moments I felt swallowed by exhaustion, moments I sat on the floor beside the crib and whispered, I don't know if I can do this. But then, my baby would curl a tiny hand around my finger, or breathe softly against my chest, and in those fragile connections, I discovered a strength I didn't know I had. Life didn't magically become easy. Bills still came faster than money. Judgment still lingered in the eyes of strangers. Loneliness still visited me in quiet hours. But I had survived the storm, and surviving changed me. I was no longer the girl staring at 2 lines on a test, drowning in fear. I was a mother, standing, living, and loving through the hardest days. And that truth carried me. Slowly, I learned to find beauty in small victories. The first time I managed to calm my baby's cries with a lullaby, the first smile that lit up their tiny face, the first night I slept more than 3 hours in a row. Each moment was a triumph, proof that progress is made step by step. My mother's steady presence, my teacher's unwavering encouragement, the kindness of a few unexpected friends, all of it became the scaffolding of a new life. There were still days I longed for the version of myself who had dreamed of college and carefree youth. But even in those moments of longing, I realized something powerful. I hadn't lost my future. I had simply rewritten it. My path looked different than I planned, yes, but it was no less valid, no less worthy. The strength I was building now, the resilience born from hardship, the love forged in sleepless nights, would carry me farther than I ever imagined. Motherhood at 18 wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of a new one, a story of survival, of love, of learning to rise when every force tried to pull me down. A story that taught me that broken plans can still lead to beautiful outcomes, that weakness can coexist with power, and that hope is not a luxury, it is a lifeline. Today, when I look back at the girl in that bathroom, trembling over a test, I want to tell her something. You are stronger than you think. You will not be defined by shame, or judgment, or fear. You will be defined by love, your love for the child who needs you, and the love you will learn to have for yourself. And when I look at my child now, growing, laughing, living proof that storms can be survived, I know that every tear, every doubt, every sleepless night was worth it. I didn't just bring a life into this world, I brought a new version of myself into existence, one who fights, one who endures, one who believes. So here is the lesson I carry, the one I want to leave with anyone listening. You may feel unprepared, too young, too weak, too alone. You may hear voices telling you that you will fail, but inside you is more strength than you know, and life has a way of growing hope in the darkest soil. Hold on. Keep going. Love fiercely. Because even at 18, even when the world doubts you, even when you doubt yourself, you can rise, you can survive, and you can turn the hardest chapter of your life into a story of courage and light.